Your approach to burnout, why is your approach so different?
In my experience, the best understanding comes when you've experienced it yourself and you've really understood what happened. Now, I burnt out, but I didn't know it. It was 1989. Burnout was hardly a concept at that time. It was just coming into focus. And my doctor said, I'm afraid you need a holiday, not on the national health, I'm afraid. And this homeopath said, my dear, your heart is tired. But then years later, a friend of mine from Sweden was talking about burnout. I heard the word and I said, that's it. That's what it was. Because burnout absolutely describes what happens. Your fire is low. So I heard the word and I went back to understand what happened to me. And the old story was that it's about work-life balance and you are working too hard and too stressed, and eventually you run out of energy and steam and you burn out.
Welcome back to the Charlene Giselle Show. I wonder, have you ever noticed that sometimes to describe the way you feel, you're using a lot of images or metaphors? Let me give you a couple of examples. I feel like a hamster on a wheel. I'm working like a dog. I'm burning the candle at both ends. I feel like I am in the rat race. Have you ever wondered why we use imageries to talk about the way we feel? Today, on the Charlene Giselle Show, I have a very special guest. Dr. Dina Glouberman is one of the world's leading experts in the power of transformational imagery. She is a renowned psychotherapist and a burnout expert. She has a very unique approach to burnout, a learning rather than a failure, which is often how we perceive it at first. Dr. Glouberman is an advocate of radical healing, which means not just putting the old show back on the road and potentially hitting burnout once again, but instead finding out what we really want and what we really need out of life and out of our careers. Enjoy the show. I am delighted to introduce you today to Dr. Glouberman. Dr. Glouberman, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I am thrilled to have you and really deeply honored. I've been following your work for a very long time. I'm a huge fan of your books and your very interesting take on burnout. And I have to confess that I was really intrigued when I came across your book that you call The Joy of Burnout. Now, I have to say, having gone through a burnout episode myself, I had to really think twice before it made complete sense. And it really does, because it can be a blessing and it's transformed my life for the better. But I would like to talk about your approach to burnout and why is your approach so different?
Thank you. Let's start with the fact that I burnt out. I know you've burnt out. I know many of the people that we're talking to have burnt out. So in my experience, the best understanding comes when you've experienced it yourself and you've really understood what happened. Now, I burnt out, but I didn't know it. This was at a time, it was 1989. Burnout was hardly a concept at that time. It was just coming into focus. And my doctor said, I'm afraid you need a holiday, not on the national health, I'm afraid. And this homeopath said, my dear, your heart is tired. And but then years later, a friend of mine from Sweden was talking about burnout. I heard the word and I said, that's it. That's what it was. Because burnout absolutely describes what happens. Your fire is low. So I heard the word and I went back to understand what happened to me. And the old story was, and still is really, that it's about work-life balance and you are working too hard and too stressed, and eventually you run out of energy and steam and you burn out. Now that wasn't my experience because I've been working hard for many, many years. I was well, I had a full-time job. I had clients, I had groups, I had two centers on a Greek island and two children. I had everything, and I didn't burn out. The moment I burnt out was the moment when I felt that we had reached a kind of security or something, and I could step back and come back into myself and explore what was going on with me rather than work, 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 work all the time. And at that moment, my ex-husband and partner came up with a new idea to do a magazine. And I thought, oh, and this is very typical in burnout. This one last time. And I won't tell the whole story, but just to say that first, it was in my house. And, the office wasn't ready yet. And the whole thing happened in my house. And I had no place to go. And, even the bathroom had two doors. So I had to walk out of the bathroom and somebody else would shut the door. So at that moment, I was ready to go inward and I was going outward instead. And in my experience of burnout, and everyone I've spoken to who's burnt out has told me this reflects their experience. As long as you're wholehearted, it feels like you can do anything. And people say to you, how do you have this energy? And you say, oh, I was born that way, But as soon as your heart goes out of the situation, if you are able to step back and think about it and say, should I change that? You have three choices. Should I change the situation? Should I change my attitude? Should I leave the situation? That's what I call the great yes or the great no. But what happens is people's identity is tied up in the path that they're taking. And you don't dare to step back because you're afraid if I decide I don't like my job, I might have to quit it and then I'll be a failure and then I can't afford to be a failure. So burnout doesn't just happen at work. I really want to say this also. It happens in any area that your identity is tied up. It could be your relationship. I interviewed people whose relationship had gone wrong and they were so invested in having a relationship. It could be a political party, whatever it is. Your identity is tied up in it. You don't dare to step back and consider whether this is working for you. So you drive yourself forward and you're like in a car, the accelerator and the brake are both on at the same time, and you don't stop fuel, and you hit the wall, Now, why I call the joy of burnout is because in a way, burnout is standing up for joy. It's saying, I can't live like this. You can't live like this. This isn't working for you. You're driving yourself. You're not in the driver's seat. You're driving yourself because you don't want to be doing this. This is an old path that doesn't work for you. And if you're lucky, and you will, not lucky, but wise, let's say, and are willing to, you need to step back and go through all the steps that it takes for you to get well. And it's what I call radical healing. You're not going to put the old show on the road. It's not doctor, make me better so I can go back to where I started from. It's, I need to find out what is going on. And the first step, I just want to say, is what I call give up hope and keep the faith. And give up hope and keep the faith means give up hope of whatever it was you thought was more important than life itself. You may never be a success or have a partner or be a good person or whatever it is you believed that was so important. And even so, you're still okay. So, in a sense, burnout is what they call a wake-up call. It's saying to you, it's time. It's actually it's typical burnout person is a very high achiever, high giver, totally devoted to their work, and you're at a very high level in all these ways. The only thing is, you haven't learned how to honor yourself. And so you haven't taken your next step. And so burnout is telling you time for your next step. And that's why it's such a positive thing if you're willing to listen.
Mm. And do you think that most high achievers go through burnout episode and wait to hit the wall rather than ask themselves the question and notice early signs? In your experience as a psychotherapist, do you see them
Yes.
hitting the wall and then reflecting, or do you see
Yes.
them being a bit more introspective as they are on the brink of burnout?
Well, I suppose the point is the people you see are the ones that weren't listening. You don't tend to see the people that are able to step back and say, wow, this isn't working for me. Because what you see, and very often, high achievers are very success driven. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason they need to be that. So we need to be that successful. We need to achieve what we want to achieve. There's a reason for it. And I remember someone who came to my center in Greece, which was like a big thing. And he said, when I see something like this, I always say to the person, what are you trying to prove? so if there's something you're trying to prove, then when your heart goes out of the situation, it's much harder for you to step back and say, wait a minute. And I think what's really important to know is that you can step back and think about it and not do anything about it. But most people are afraid to think about it in case they have to do something which they don't want to do. So, yeah.
And one thing that I've heard you mention and that really caught my attention, and I would love for you to perhaps share your thoughts a little bit, is when I heard you talk about burnout and use the framework of referring to the goose and the golden egg.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes. The goose and the golden egg. The golden eggs are all our achievements and all our success and all the things we've given the world and all the love we've given. And the typical burnout person believes in their heart of hearts that their value lies in their golden eggs and not in themselves as a goose. What's a goose? And so they believe that people value them only for their golden eggs. And this is why burnout is such a shocking experience for people, because people who've been very active, very successful, very overworked, and so on, suddenly, when I burnt out, I was like, I was managing to actually run my groups because that gave me some energy. But I would go to Skiros, to our place in Greece. I would run a course in the morning. Then I'd close the shutters, go back to my room, close the shutters, no lights. I couldn't stand any stimulation. I had to spend the rest of the day in bed, And I was at that time able to do what I was doing. Most people, when they burn out, very often they can't anymore. They get too ill, and they're lying in bed like that. And then as they begin to get better, they go to a party and someone says, well, what do you do? And they don't know what to say. And this is such a shock that for people who are that invested in what we call the golden eggs. And so one of the things I say to people is that you need to build what I call the soul community, which is a community of people who value you for yourself and not for your golden eggs. But the interesting thing is that many of the people you thought valued you only for your golden eggs, actually, it wasn't true. That was your idea. And when you tell them, I can't do anything anymore, they still love you. And I think that's a great discovery, because you have to learn to value yourself. And actually, when I was writing my book, I sort of studied all the amazing things about geese that I did.
Well, because there is the element, and that's something I would like for us to expand on a little bit. One thing that I notice a lot in my patients and clients when they come to me with burnout signs and symptoms is that there is an element of chronic self-sacrifice. There
Yes,
is the element of chronic lack of self-care, the most basic
yes,
even at times.
yes,
There is that element of neglecting to even take a walk. I mean, if I took neglecting
yes,
to take time to eat, take time to breathe, right? The most basic need, sacrificing sleep.
absolutely.
How does one become a bit more aware of the fact that they are the goose and actually they need to step back and look after themselves? Because for many high achievers, that notion even of self-care seems very sentimental, very fluffy, and it's hard to actually get a high achiever to pause, reflect, and think about that.
Well, that's why the high achiever comes to you when they're burnt out, because they haven't paused and reflected. And if they came to you before they burnt out, they're already telling you, help me. I need to know what's going on. I'm not happy. This isn't working for me. My heart's gone out of the thing. And when I say my heart's gone out, it could be either because you've changed or the situation's changed.
Mm.
But whatever it is, for some reason, it's not working for you. Are you going to listen? What are you going to do about it? Then somebody might come to you and be willing to listen. But the kind of people that don't want to listen tend to end up burnt out. And then they have to listen. Or they say, doctor, make me better so I can go back and do the same thing. And then they burn out again. So it requires, I think, a little spark of caring about yourself. And of course, the truth of the matter is that once you do care about yourself, your work will be better.
Of course, yes.
Because you'll be inspired, instead of driving yourself, instead of doing work that is driven. See, if you look at the symptoms of burnout, so one of them is that your fire is low. Another one is that you get ill more often to do your work. And another one is you're working harder and accomplishing less. So actually, not listening isn't going to help you, be a success. It's going to help you continue on a pathway where you drive yourself and eventually the work is not as good because you're not inspired. Your work was wonderful when you were inspired. If you're no longer inspired, something has shifted. And I think that there's a moment when you have to really think about that and say, has my heart gone out of the situation? When did it go out of the situation? Why didn't I dare step back and listen? And once we understand why I didn't step back, then we understand what's driving me.
Dr. Glouberman, I was wondering if I could step into somebody's shoes and if you could let me be a high achiever for a moment who is on the
Okay,
brink
let's see.
of burnout.
Okay, let's see.
So let me be Harriet.
Okay.
And our Harriet is a very successful lawyer, very accomplished. She is approaching partnership. So she's been working for many, many years, over 15 years. She works in a very prestigious firm in Paris. And Harriet really cares about her profession. She thinks being a lawyer is very noble, and she always wanted to be a lawyer and she wants to continue to be a lawyer, but she is completely overwhelmed. She's noticing that her performance is declining.
Okay, so let's stop. If you're going to be Harriet, come to me and talk to me about what's happening for you.
I am conflicted about priorities. I can't sleep because I have so much work. I can't stop thinking about my clients at the weekend, so I don't pay attention to my family, and they tell me that I'm not present. I dread work on Sunday night, and I don't sleep. And on Monday, even though I've just started my week, I already feel behind.
So tell me what keeps you going at work. What is making you get up and go to work on Monday morning? It doesn't sound like a pleasure.
I love being a lawyer. I do. I love my clients. I love the work that I do. I love being of service. I love being part of the firm. And I'm really interested in the cases that we have.
So I'm going to ask you a question that you may not have thought of. When did your heart go out of what you're doing at work? When did your heart go out of it? When did you start feeling like it was all too much for you? I bet there was a time when you just loved going to work.
Yes,
You
there
were
was.
excited by it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I can see what
Yes.
it felt like when you were excited about your work. What changed? Something changed.
Yeah, the constant pressure, the chronic overload, the non-stop, the drip, 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 drip over the years, that feeling of running in circles and chasing my tail constantly and never having time to do all that I have to do because there is an immense, infinite workload and constant pressures.
And in the face of that, you just run faster.
Yes.
You just run faster. And in the face of that, you never took time for yourself.
No.
You never took
No.
care of yourself. You didn't take time for your family. You didn't do anything.
No, I used to dance. I don't dance anymore. I used to read.
Okay.
I don't like reading anymore. I used to cook. I don't cook anymore.
Yeah. Tell me how you feel about that.
Sad.
Yeah. It is sad. Because actually, you brought the best of you to work. You're not bringing the best of you anymore because the best of you is not available anymore, is it? You were this joyful, inspired, dancing woman, weren't you? And now you're like a workaholic, aren't you?
Mm.
So if I asked you to let an image, just to close your eyes for a second, if I ask you to let an image come up of an animal, plant, I'm not doing relaxation or anything, just see if something comes up. Animal, plant, or an object that somehow represents how you feel at this moment in your life.
Trapped. I feel.
So you're an animal, plant, or an object. Are you a trapped animal?
Yes.
And what animal are you? And tell me how you're
Like
trapped.
a bird in a cage.
You're a bird in a cage. Okay. And tell me how do you feel about being in a cage?
I want to fly out.
You want to fly out. Yeah. How long have you been in this cage? And now I'm not asking Harry, and I'm asking the bird. How long have you been in this cage?
A few years.
A few years. So I'd like you to imagine that you move up above yourself like a light looking down on the bird. What can you see about that's the light? What can you see about the bird that it doesn't know about itself?
That it's got really long, strong wings.
Wow. Okay. And if you could whisper something to the bird that would help the bird, what would you whisper to the bird?
You could lead many other birds if you were part of a big flock, and you could weather many storms if you were out of that cage.
Okay. And can you also whisper to that bird whether she actually needs to be in that cage, whether she's really locked into that cage?
No, she's not.
She's not. She thinks she is. But what's the truth? As you look from above, what's the truth about
Well, the
this cage?
truth is there is something that makes her feel quite safe and secure in the cage. There is a sense of security.
Okay. And is that security making her happy?
No.
No. Okay. So she has a choice. Okay. So I'd like you to come back into being the bird and receive that message. Ask the bird, what do you feel about what the light said to you?
Empowered.
Empowered. Okay. So what's your next step?
To rekindle my passions, the things that make
No, no,
me
no. Now you're talking as Harriet. Forget Harriet.
forget
As the
Harriet.
bird,
As
what's
the
your next
bird.
step? Yeah. As the bird, what's your next step?
To fly around, to get out of the cage.
Yeah, Harriet, okay, I want you to get out of this cage because
Yes.
from above you could see the cage wasn't really keeping you there. You were staying in there because you felt more secure. So how are you going to get out? I want you to go for it.
Well, actually, the door is not locked. I'm just
The door
choosing
is
to
not locked.
stay
No,
in the
the door
cage.
is not locked. So what are you going to do? Stay in there for security or get yourself out of there?
And get yourself. I will be the flying bird.
Fly out of that cage. Okay. So can you do that? Can you imagine just flying out of the cage?
Yes.
And then I want you to look back at Harriet. As the flying bird, what can you see about Harriet that she doesn't know about herself?
Yes, the way she's doing it is actually not sustainable, and by doing it with sacrificing everything else, she lost the passion and love that she used to feel.
Yes. And she lost herself,
Yeah.
didn't she? Okay. So come back and become Harriet and receive that message. So tell me, Harriet, what do you think about all that?
It was very helpful, but the biggest question on my mind is, how do I continue to be a lawyer knowing that I know now? Because I'm willing to reconsider my habits and behavior, but I know deep down that this is my vocation. And I do feel very strongly about continuing that career path.
Okay. So I'm going to say this to you. When people get an insight, the first thing they do is think into the future and say, well, how can I do it? The answer is, are you willing to take care of, are you willing to come back to who you really are?
Mm.
Are you willing to let go of the security of a cage and come back to being a flying bird, basically? Are you willing to do that? It's a kind of a yes or no.
I don't know if it's an easy yes for Harriet. Like it
Okay.
might be a big question.
It might be a big question. But what I would say to Harriet, if you're willing to, then you need to try out what it's like to take care of yourself
Yeah.
and see what happens to the work.
Yes.
Because in my experience, you do better work once you're back in touch with yourself. And this, and as I said, one of the classic signs of burnout is you're working harder and accomplishing less. So you've been going around in circles for a long time. If you trust yourself, trust the person that you came into this work, find out what happens, take a risk, find out what happens. And if you really are still inspired by your work, which you sound like you are, I think you'll just do better and better and be happy. It's a sort of no-brainer.
Yes. Thank
Does that
you.
make sense?
It does very much.
Okay.
No, it's very powerful because in many ways, for many years, I was Harriet.
You were Harriet. Ah, okay.
In many ways.
Yes.
So the facts I just imagine based on several clients that I have on my
But
mind and what I
it's also
hear most often.
what you've done. I want to say something about the word trapped. You started off with saying you were trapped.
Yes.
Now, trapped, it turns out, always means you're not trapped. In other words, when something is necessary, if what you're doing was absolutely necessary, you wouldn't burn out. You know, people have, like in wartime, moved out of their mental hospitals and gone somewhere they could do it, and then they, you know. So if it's necessary, you do it. Trapped actually means I don't dare to consider my choices. And this story of the bird in the cage is absolutely classic. I can't tell you how many people have had the image of a bird in a cage, a lion in a cage, or whatever.
And why do you think that is? Because I've had the same with my patients.
That's the trapped. But I have never, ever worked with somebody where the cage wasn't either open or there was a key somewhere or something. The cage has never, ever, ever been really locked. That's how I know trapped doesn't mean trapped. It means you believe you tell yourself that you're trapped. You know, I have to do it for the money. I have to do it for the this. I have to do it. It never turns out to be true. Can I tell you the story about a client of mine who was burnt out?
Please.
He had this image. We did an exercise a bit like that, and he had an image of being this tree that was hanging over. He was a beautiful artist as well, although he was an architect. And so he drew it for me, this beautiful image of this tree hanging over a cliff. The tree is holding on for dear life. And that was what he felt his life was like, that he had to hold on for dear life. He had to work long, just like Harriet's saying, long hours and so on. Otherwise, he wouldn't keep his job. He wouldn't be able to support his family and so on. And when you looked at this, it was like really awful. And I said to him, as the tree, I want you to let go, see what happens. And I thought that the tree would manage to stay up. I was wrong. The tree fell. It fell into the water, and around it, soil and so on gathered. And suddenly he was a tree on a little island of his own. And he eventually understood that he'd been holding on because of his fear of what his father's judgment of, that was his identification. And that actually he had all this talent, he was going to be able to create his own world. And so from then on, he kept his job, but he kept normal hours. He didn't overwork. And he started thinking about what he could do with his life that would be different. Mm-hmm. So that would be an example of someone whose image is keeping them in this terrible position. So your image of being in a cage was keeping you going, you know, as you know, that's normal. People are in cages. Well, it's not normal. It's there is a choice involved. If you were really in a cage, and it was locked, you would just get on with it. It's a different. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely.
It's a different quality. Yeah.
Yes.
Even burnout.
And it's fascinating to me. The reason it was, so quick for me to pick this example is because in my work using metaphors with patients and clients, that always comes up. That cage. Yeah. And it's very common in burnout. And, when I say it's how I used to feel, it's really how I used to feel many, many years ago when I burnt out. And what I love about your approach, and I can really attest to the truth and the core of it, is that you can work extremely hard and not burn out when you love it. And it may be hard to believe, but the truth is I work more now doing what I do and running the company that I do than I used to as a lawyer. But I'm
you're not
far away from burning out. I'm the happiest I've ever been.
Because you're wholehearted.
Yes.
Wholehearted. And when we're wholehearted, everything works in order to feed our energy and do our best work.
Well, I had to put measures in place as well. I had to really learn that
absolutely
I am prone to burnout. I have to, you talked about that fire. I feel like in many ways I'm a bit like oil on fire. I'm always watching out because I know that.
Absolutely. But your point was, what do you do when someone doesn't feel that it's important how they feel?
Yes.
So what's changed is that you know that it matters how you feel.
It does.
And, one of the things I say is that the road to burnout is paved with denial. People don't want to admit what's going on. They're too scared. And and I and something is more important than the truth. Your success or your. I mean, I'm thinking about someone I interviewed for my book who she had a partner, and he lost his job and became unemployed and got depressed. And she set to work. She looked for the jobs. She found the job. She wrote away for the application. All he did was sign things. She wrote away for the applications. She filled out his applications. The only thing he did was sign these things and go to the interviews he was given. And she was very bright, and she got him good interviews. And her fear was of being on the shelf. She would do anything. And in the end, he got a job. He went to Paris, and she went to hospital. Mm. So that wasn't work, but it's still that having to get somewhere because you have a fear of what happens. There's an old, as a child, we used to say this, which I found is one of the best ways to understand why people don't step back, is I hate spinach. And I'm glad I hate spinach, because if I liked it, I would eat it. And I hate spinach. So at this point, I believe I have to keep the job as it is right now. I don't want to step back and think I don't want to do that, because I can't bear the idea that I might have to change. So people don't dare to step back. So I talk about how we have to get to the point where nothing is more important than the truth. It doesn't mean you have to leave the job. It doesn't mean you have to do anything, but you have to be honest with yourself. And this is what's very hard when you're very identified with something. You don't want to know. Do you agree? There was something you didn't want to know.
Yes, absolutely. I had actually very little notion of self-care back when I was a lawyer, because I come from a family where intellectual endeavors were praised and recognized, and being top of the class, being the best, as of course as parents define whatever best is, and going to most prestigious university, most prestigious firms, and that status was very important in my family, and I'm grateful for that, because it provided for an amazing education and very strong values and solid foundation. But it felt like being a bit of a racehorse, as opposed to
the golden eggs also, Yes. You thought they only wanted your golden eggs. You thought they wanted your achievement.
Yes, and that couldn't be further away from the truth, really.
And if you look back, you realize that it was because they loved you that they wanted you to do
this. Of course it is.
But you couldn't know that.
No,
you thought it was because they wanted that they would only love you if you did this.
Yes, particularly my father. But now I know it is not true.
Yeah.
I had to do a lot of work on that.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. But we have to be willing to do some work on ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. I wonder, considering how powerful this was, Dr. Glouberman, and I think stepping into somebody's shoes can really ignite something in our listener, because in many ways, many of us are Harriet.
I've been Harriet, as you can see. I've also burnt out.
And I wonder, just so that our listener don't feel left out, if they're not Harriet, if I could step into somebody else's shoes, and if you could let me be Philip for a moment.
Okay. Let's see, Philip.
Philip is, well, I will speak. I am Philip. Okay. I I'm a trader on Wall Street. I am obsessed with what I do and the trades. I would describe myself as very good at it. But my wife recently told me that she thinks I'm addicted to work. And she complains that at night I'm on my phone, on my laptop, much more than I am present with her. And I feel that I'm constantly in worry and hurry state and jumping from one trade to the next. And it feels like it's always moving the goalpost. And I hear that my wife catches me saying, I will when, and I will when, and I will stop when, and we will rest when, and actually when never arrives because there is always the next goal and the next trade. And she's a bit tired of that pattern, and I'm a bit worried about my marriage at this point.
Tell me what worries you.
The fact that I love my wife very much, but in truth, I don't give her the best of me because most of the time when I come back from work, I am worried and quite stressed, and I pass that on, and it's contagious. I can see her being more reactive to me because I am angry most of the time and fearful, which is hard to admit, especially to her, because I don't want to admit that I'm scared. But I do have a lot of fears running through my head.
Tell me what you're most scared of.
Not being successful enough, not winning. I want to win. I want to win.
Do you have any idea why it's so important to you? Usually these things start when we're quite young, don't they?
I do love the thrill.
Yeah, that's the good part of it. You love the thrill. But this is something else. You know, the Buddhists have an expression, attachment is loss. And that means that it's one thing to be excited about winning, and there's another thing to be so attached and invested in winning that you're frightened all the time. So the minute you're totally invested in the results of your actions, at that moment you become frightened all the time. And then you have to hold on for dear life, which is what you're doing, isn't it?
It is.
It is what you're doing. Let me ask you another question, Philip. You're afraid that your marriage is maybe going very wrong because you're not giving her the best of you. If you were married to yourself, would you be thinking about leaving?
Yes, I would have left already.
Yes, because and what I'm saying is, are you giving yourself the best of you?
No, I don't even know what that is anymore.
You've forgotten.
I've forgotten.
So let's go back. You see, one of the things I say, can I ask, have you had any experience of burning out? Do you feel as if you're, because it sounds like you're a bit burnt out. The joy is gone, isn't it?
I feel joy or thrill when I make a good trade.
Yeah.
My measure of happiness is success.
Is success. Was it always like that when you first got involved?
Yes. I think it's what attracted me to that profession.
But it was thrilling.
Yes.
Okay. And what would happen when you lost?
Oh, anger.
Uh-huh.
Rage sometimes.
Rage. And then what? And then what happened?
And then I get obsessed about making the next win.
Uh-huh. Okay.
In many ways, that's kept me in the game. And I would say that's given me my competitive edge.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to ask you, is this way of living working for you?
No.
No. Okay. How would you like to really think about what would really make you happy? Would you spend a moment with me thinking about that? Are you willing to?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So let's imagine, maybe close your eyes, and let's imagine it's 6 months from now and you're feeling miserable.
Well, I don't need to look for 6 months from now. I'm feeling pretty miserable now, doctor.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. 6 months from now, okay? I want you to imagine, Where are you?
I'm coming back from work. I'm super
Okay.
stressed.
Yeah.
My wife is upset with me. I'm crashing on the sofa and I feel pretty miserable.
And what's the feeling? What's the feeling?
Drained, worried.
Drained, worried. Yeah. What's the worst of it? The feeling, not the reason.
The worst of it is that it feels gray. It feels like a big
Everything feels
gray
great.
cloud and a constant pressure. I feel like it's almost as if I have this weight on my shoulder and it feels heavy and gray. That's the best way I can describe it.
Okay.
Heavy.
Now tell me, what's at the center of this bad feeling? What's the worst of it? What makes you feel gray?
This nonstop chasing. Well, actually, I don't even know what I'm chasing anymore.
I don't know
It
what you're
feels
chasing.
like I'm
Yeah.
this hamster in a wheel, and
You're a hamster in a wheel. So tell me, if you asked yourself, what did I do to get myself here? Not what did the work do or my wife do, any what did I do to get myself here? It's the main choice I've made in this 6 months that's got me so miserable.
haven't paused to reflect. I haven't taken a moment to consider my options or to even evaluate the way I feel. I just get up, go, hurry, work, 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 back to back, nonstop, come back, start again.
Wow. So you have been a hamster in the wheel.
I am the hamster in the wheel.
You are a hamster. Okay. Now come back to the present moment. Now, Philip, let's try a different future. Okay. Are you willing to try a different future?
Okay.
6 months from now, and I feel great. I feel great. Okay. I want you to step into the body of Philip. 6 months from now, I feel great.
That's hard.
It's hard, but let's do it.
Okay.
It's possible. I feel great. What's the good feeling? Not what it's about. What's the good feeling?
I feel taller when I feel great. I feel brighter.
Okay, forget the comparative words. Just you feel tall, you feel bright. What else? What's the best of it?
Best of it is I'm smiling.
You're
It's
smiling.
lighter around it. It's
I'm smiling and I have light around me.
mm-hmm.
Okay, what's the main thing that makes me feel good?
I feel like I have time all over again. I feel like I can breathe. I feel like I have my head above water. I feel like I
Okay,
have more perspective.
okay. Now, here's the $1,000,000 question. What did I do differently to get here than I did to get to the negative future? What did I do differently? And I want you to look back at what you've done. I don't want you to use your head. I want you to use your memory. What did I do to get myself to feel this happy, smiling feeling?
I took my wife on a beautiful walk in Central Park that she's been asking me to do for years and I never do, and spent a whole Sunday with her. And then I took her for lunch to her favorite little restaurant. And then we had a date night and we laughed like we used to laugh on the first date.
And tell me, what enabled you to do that? You couldn't do that in the other picture. What made it possible for you to do that? What did you decide inside that you decided to take her for this walk and this lovely time together?
That it was possible to feel those feelings again, and that it was worth it.
And that it's worth it. And in this picture of you feeling happy, has your work suffered?
No, I actually I'm going on the training floor on Monday, and my headspace is clear. It's almost like the cloud's gone. I can think. I actually have great ideas, and I can't wait to make another trade because it feels like it will be a more creative way to do it, and I feel inspired. And
And tell me one more thing, Philip. What happens if the trade goes wrong? What will happen then?
oh, that's still a sticky point.
It's a sticky point, but tell me what would make it possible for you to keep on taking your wife out in this lovely way?
Well, maybe I would think that I just need to learn what I could have changed or improved in my process.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe also think about if I could have slept better, would it have made a difference? If I could have rested a bit more.
So instead of being angry, what you would do is think, I wonder what led to that failure. What could I have done differently? And what happens if it was just chance? You couldn't have done anything differently. Would you still be okay? Could you still smile?
I'll do my best to try.
Okay. Is it worth it?
It is worth it.
It is worth it. Okay. Let's come back to the present, Philip. And we're coming to the end of our time, aren't we? But that was great. So, as Philip, I have two questions to ask you.
Please.
Are you willing to do whatever you have to? Oh, no, let me ask a different. No, I have three questions. First question is, what in you wants that first future? The miserable one. What part of you wants that miserable future? Must be some part of you because you've been living it. What part of you wants that miserable future?
The part that has the head stuck in the sand, the ostrich part of me, the part that doesn't know that there is another way. I think that's the part.
That's the part. And are you willing to go for the positive future?
It felt pretty great.
It felt great. Okay, so let me ask you, are you willing to do whatever you have to get there?
Yes.
And are you willing to accept that in the unlikely event that you don't get there, you'll still be okay and you'll be able to ask what's next?
That's hard. But I am.
Yeah, it's the only way, because if you're holding on to this as another goal, you're going to fail at it. You have to be able to do whatever you have to do, and then also know you'll be okay if it doesn't work out. And that's the attitude that you are beginning to have at work. I'll do whatever I have to do to make a good trade. And in the unlikely event that it doesn't work out, I'm still here. I'm still okay. I'll still be able to ask what next. And there'll be another trade and then another one. How's that feel?
Feels like a relief.
It's a good relief. And Philip, I want to tell you a story about this book. This was the book, The Joy of Burnout, which Charlene read. You haven't read it yet.
Clearly, I haven't.
But this is the book I wrote during COVID. And I wrote it by doing that exercise because I did the negative. I didn't know what I was going to do after COVID hit and lockdown. And I was so confused. And my negative future, I couldn't breathe because I felt so ashamed I'd wasted the year.
Mm.
And my positive future, I had a book. I had done this book. And the next day, I was so afraid of ending up not being able to breathe that I started on the book. I started on the proposals for the book. So it's like, are you willing to be happy? Are you?
Yeah, Philip is, yes.
Yes. And I think Charlene has already discovered this, haven't you?
I have. And that's why I feel so passionate about sharing the power of your work, because it can be life-changing. It truly can be. And it doesn't mean, what I'm really glad that you highlighted, and that's something that I very firmly advocate, it doesn't mean you can't do what you love doing.
No, it doesn't mean that.
You can continue to be successful. In fact, you can be more successful.
In fact, you have to do what you love doing. That's the thing.
Yes.
And the other thing is that I want to say is that I have a concept which I call soul esteem. I don't know if you believe in the soul or not, but it's when some inner part of me whispers that I have to do something, then I have to listen. And I don't think what it's going to cost me, and I don't think, can I do it? I just go for it. And when I have soul esteem, I don't burn out. So it's about following who you really are And if you still are, for example, a trader who gets excited about the next win, then you must keep doing it. It's wonderful, but not with that attitude.
Not with that
Not with the
attitude.
attitude that I have to have it or I'll die. I mean, I've had people I've interviewed who were wishing that they were in hospital, having had an accident with the white sheets, so that they wouldn't have to go to work.
Yes, yes.
But they couldn't decide not to go to work the next day. So something is more important than the truth. Something is more important than my health. Something is more important than my partner. Something's more important than my family. What is this something? It couldn't be more important than you.
No. Dr. Glouberman, I am deeply grateful. It has been really a true honor to hear you do what you do live, allowing me and entertaining the idea of letting me be Harriet and Philip, because I know many of our listeners can relate to these struggles and pain points. And I would love to encourage our listener to get your beautiful books that have truly inspired me, and I know have inspired many other high achievers. And,
Thank you. Can I just say something about the book? Why people write to me and they say, you saved my life? It's because people feel so ashamed of burnout. And what I've said to people is, no, this is a step on your life journey, and there is a way out, and you haven't done anything wrong, and you will feel happier.
And your fire will grow back even stronger.
And when your fire comes back, you'll be happier, but also your work will be happier.
Absolutely. On that note, Dr. Glouberman, I would like to thank you one more time, and I'm very grateful for this conversation.
And thank you for being so willing to play.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for spending your time with me today and listening to this episode. Remember to subscribe so that you can receive weekly updates. And if today's message resonated with you, please remember to share it with a friend, a colleague, or a loved one who could really benefit from this episode.